Do not be deceived by appearances. What you see with your outer eyes is but the shadow of yesterday's belief. The world parades itself before you, convincing you that it is solid, that it is fixed, that it is final. But I tell you, it is not final. The only reality that endures is the reality you dare to assume within yourself. When you look at your circumstances, you are tempted to bow before them as though they were gods. You say, "This is my life, this is my condition, this is my fate." And yet, it is only the reflection of the assumptions you once held. The outer world is nothing more than the echo of the inner man. So, ignore it. Ignore the evidence that mocks you. Ignore the bank account that whispers lack. Ignore the body that tells you it is weak. Ignore the people who cannot see your dream. And simply assume. Assume with the boldness of a creator. Assume until the assumption feels natural, until the dream becomes the very atmosphere in which you live. Persist, for assumption, when persisted in, hardens into fact. The world must bend to the state you occupy. You do not beg reality to change. You rise in imagination, and the outer must follow. Tonight, before you sleep, close your eyes to what is and open them to what you desire. See it, feel it, enter it. Walk in it as though it were already here. And tomorrow, though the world may still resist, you will know the seed has been planted and harvest is certain. So I say, ignore your reality. Just keep assuming. For assumption is the bridge between the unseen and the seen. Outer reality is nothing more than the echo of what has already been assumed within the mind. Every condition, every circumstance, every event you now witness is the crystallization of thoughts and feelings once entertained. What you believed yesterday stands before you today, clothed in form and substance, pretending to be permanent. Yet it holds no life of its own. It merely reflects the inner state that conceived it. Change the assumption, and the shadow must shift. For the world outside cannot resist the command of imagination. It is always the past assumption projecting itself onto the screen of life. Circumstances are not the ultimate authority over your life, for they are nothing but the echoes of beliefs once accepted as true. What you face today is the out-picturing of thoughts and assumptions that have already been impressed upon the subconscious mind. The outer scene is delayed, like an echo, reflecting what has been inwardly entertained long before it appeared in form. To call circumstances final is to mistake the shadow for the source, for the real power lies not in the event itself, but in the belief that preceded it. If you alter your inner conviction, if you dare to assume a new state regardless of appearances, the echo must eventually change to match it. The present condition has no power of permanence unless you continue to feed it with belief. You are never bound by what is happening outside of you. You are only bound by the inner state you refuse to abandon. The echo fades when a new sound is made, and in the same way, old circumstances dissolve when a new assumption takes root. Every situation is fluid, pliable, waiting for the command of belief to shape it into something different. Never bow before present conditions, for they are but the residue of what you once assumed to be true. The mistake most people make is giving their loyalty to what is already fading, what is already yesterday's creation, clothed in form. To treat conditions as final is to hand over your creative power to a reflection, as if the mirror had the authority to dictate your face. You must understand that present reality is inert, powerless in itself, animated only by the life you once gave it through imagination and belief. When you look at your circumstances with fear, despair, or resignation, you are not reading truth. You are only rehearsing the past. Do not let what you see persuade you into submission. The outer world has no voice except the one you grant it. If the bank account is empty, it is the shadow of a thought you once entertained. If the body appears unwell, it is the out-pictured memory of an inner state once impressed. To bow before such conditions is to agree that the shadow governs the light, when in truth it is your inner light that casts the shadow. Refuse to be deceived by appearances, for appearances are always delayed reflections. Stand firm in your assumption of the desired state. Carry yourself as though the new reality were already here, as though present conditions were irrelevant. Do not plead with circumstances, do not fight them. Do not even acknowledge them as rulers over your destiny. Instead, lift your attention inward, to the realm where creation begins. When you assume with persistence and faith, the outer world must eventually align, for it has no choice but to yield to the state you occupy within. Ignore appearances that contradict your desire, for they are nothing but illusions clothed in temporary form, reflections of states you no longer wish to occupy. The senses will shout their evidence, presenting lack, limitation, and delay as though they were the ultimate reality. But the wise do not yield to such persuasion. What you behold with the outer eye is always a step behind, the aftereffect of imagination, the residue of beliefs once accepted. To grant appearances authority is to surrender your creative power to shadows, as though the shadow could determine the light from which it comes. You must rise above the tyranny of appearances and hold steadfast to the unseen reality already secured in imagination. When you desire something, you plant a seed in consciousness. That seed is real, more real than the soil of circumstance in which it has not yet fully emerged. But if you continually look at the surface of life and declare, "It has not happened, therefore it cannot be," you uproot your own creation and deny the law that shapes all things. Ignore the evidence that argues against your dream. Ignore the voice of reason that says it is impossible. Ignore the passing forms that try to convince you of their permanence. The only permanence lies in the assumption you dare to persist in, for assumption, when nourished, becomes fact. Every appearance that contradicts your desire is a test of faith, an opportunity to remain loyal to the unseen. Do not argue with appearances, do not fight them, and do not despair at their seeming strength. Simply turn within and occupy the state of your wish fulfilled, knowing that what is felt inwardly will, in time, manifest outwardly. The outer world is compelled to take the shape of the inner conviction. Appearances may scream lack, but your imagination can whisper abundance, and if you persist in hearing that inner voice, the outer must bow to it. Hold unwaveringly to your assumption, ignore the contradictions, and live inwardly as though the desire were already here. For in imagination it is already accomplished. Assume boldly, as a creator, not a beggar, for you were never meant to plead with life for scraps of what you already possess in imagination. To beg is to confess weakness, to admit that power lies outside yourself, to declare that the world is master and you are its servant. But to assume is to recognize your divine authorship, to step into the awareness that imagination is the only reality and that every condition you desire begins within you. The beggar looks at appearances and asks for permission, but the creator closes his eyes to appearances and commands the unseen into form. When you assume boldly, you are not waiting for circumstances to validate your desire, you are declaring it real now, clothed in the authority of inner conviction. Every time you hesitate, every time you plead, every time you ask, "When will it come?" you confess that you have not yet grasped your true position. Life does not respond to begging, it responds to the state you occupy. When you live in the state of already having, when you feel it as natural, the outer world cannot help but conform, for it is only the shadow of your assumption. The bold creator does not lower himself to circumstances, but lifts circumstances to his inner vision. He does not ask the world to change, he changes himself in imagination, and the world must follow. Assuming boldly is not arrogance but alignment with truth. It is the awareness that your desires are not foreign gifts to be earned but rightful expressions of who you already are in consciousness. The timid assumption says, "I hope one day it may happen," while the bold assumption declares, "It is already so, I am already it." This difference in feeling is the difference between endless waiting and inevitable manifestation. To assume boldly is to enter the state fully, to think from it, to feel from it, to act from it, until it is more real to you than the world outside. Do not beg life for what is already yours. Do not place your faith in time or circumstance. Stand as the creator you are and take possession of your desire now in imagination. Every bold assumption is a seed, and every seed carries within it the certainty of harvest. The world may not shift immediately, but persist, for the bold never doubt that what is assumed inwardly will harden into fact. The beggar waits on conditions to change, the creator lives in the change now. Therefore, Assume boldly, not timidly, for creation belongs to those who dare to claim it within. Persist until the assumption feels natural, for at first the mind will resist, the senses will mock you, and the old state will cling to your attention with all its seeming authority. When you begin to assume a new state, it may feel like a lie. It may feel unnatural. It may feel as though you are forcing something untrue upon yourself. Yet this is only the residue of the old belief trying to hold its ground. Every new state must first be impressed upon consciousness until it becomes the natural atmosphere of your mind, and this can only be accomplished by persistence. What feels unnatural at first becomes natural through repetition, and what becomes natural is inevitably expressed in the world of form. Imagination is the workshop of creation, and assumption is the tool by which we shape its materials. If you merely dabble in an assumption, if you touch it lightly and then retreat back into the old state, nothing changes, for the subconscious only accepts what is consistently and persistently entertained. To persist is to return again and again to the wish fulfilled, no matter what the outer world displays, no matter how loudly the senses argue against you. Persistence is loyalty to the unseen, the steadfast refusal to abandon the inner vision in favor of outer appearances. At first, the assumption may feel foreign, like trying to wear a garment that does not quite fit. But the more often you put it on, the more natural it becomes, until one day you no longer notice it at all, you simply are it. That is the secret to persist until the state feels so real, so normal, that it requires no effort, no striving, no rehearsal. You simply think from it, feel from it, act from it, without resistance. And when this point is reached, manifestation is certain, for the subconscious accepts the state as fact and the outer world must follow. Do not confuse persistence with struggle. To persist is not to strain or to fight, but to gently, consistently return to the inner reality of your desire. It is to live more and more in imagination, until the dream becomes the inner climate of your being. The outer world may still echo the old state for a time, but do not be deceived by this delay. The law cannot fail. As you persist, the new state grows roots, takes hold, and begins to bear fruit in ways the senses cannot yet perceive. Persistence transforms the unnatural into the natural, the imagined into the inevitable. Every great change in life begins with an assumption that felt impossible at first, yet became undeniable through repetition. The wealthy man once assumed wealth when his pockets were empty. The healthy woman once assumed vitality when her body was frail. The loved once assumed affection when loneliness surrounded them. Through persistence, these assumptions became natural, and once natural, they became visible. Persist, then, until your assumption no longer feels like imagination but like life itself, for when it feels natural within, it must take form without. Imagination shapes reality. Persistence hardens it into fact, for imagination is the workshop of creation and persistence is the law that gives it permanence. Everything you now behold in the outer world began first as a thought, an image, a feeling impressed upon consciousness. The chair you sit upon, the building you enter, the life you live, all were once unseen ideas, imagined and believed into form. Nothing appears in the world without first being conceived in the mind. This is the foundation of all creation. To imagine is to set into motion the unseen forces that shape matter, and to persist in that imagination is to bring it forth into visible experience. Yet many fail not because they cannot imagine, but because they do not persist. They hold an image of the wish fulfilled for a moment, they feel it briefly, and then they allow the senses to convince them otherwise. They look at appearances, see no immediate change, and abandon the assumption, returning to the old state that produced the very reality they wish to escape. Imagination without persistence is like planting a seed and then uprooting it each day to check if it has sprouted. The soil cannot yield its fruit if the seed is not allowed to remain. So too, imagination cannot yield results without the persistence that hardens assumption into fact. Persistence does not mean strain or struggle, it means loyalty to your vision, a steadfast devotion to the unseen reality you have chosen to inhabit. When you persist, you carry your assumption with you into sleep, into waking, into every moment, regardless of what the senses report. The world may still display the remnants of the old state, but you do not bow to them. You return again and again to the image of your fulfilled desire, until it begins to feel so natural, so effortless, that you no longer distinguish between imagination and reality. At that point, the subconscious accepts the state as true, and the law of being compels it to externalize. Every great transformation in life bears witness to this truth. The inventor persists in the vision of his creation long before others can see it. The artist persists in the picture held within long before the canvas reflects it. The dreamer persists in his imagined end long before the world applauds it. What begins as a fragile thought, nurtured through persistence, hardens into the fact others call reality. The bold few who understand this principle no longer bow before appearances. They know appearances are delayed reflections, shadows of past beliefs, and they persist in their new assumption until the shadow must shift. To imagine without persistence is to dream without awakening, but to persist in imagination is to guarantee its manifestation. The subconscious mind is impressionable, and repetition is the tool by which impressions are made permanent. Each time you return to the state of your desire fulfilled, you reinforce its reality within. Each time you refuse to be swayed by contrary appearances, you water the seed you have planted. Slowly, silently, invisibly, the new state grows until at last it bursts forth into the visible world, hardened into fact by your persistence. Therefore, never despise the small beginnings of imagination. See in them the seeds of tomorrow's facts. Do not abandon your vision because the world has not yet caught up with it. Know that imagination is the cause, and persistence is the law by which cause becomes effect. As you persist, the line between what is real and what is imagined dissolves, and what once was only a dream becomes the very ground upon which you stand. Imagination shapes reality, persistence hardens it into fact, and this truth, once realized, places in your hands the key to every change you will ever desire. The world must conform to the state you occupy, for the outer is nothing more than the reflection of the inner, the shadow cast by the position you hold in consciousness. States are infinite, and you are forever moving among them. Yet whichever state you accept as your dwelling place becomes the lens through which you see, the vibration you emit, and the law to which the world around you must yield. You are not bound by circumstances, conditions, or even past experiences. You are bound only by the state you occupy and persist in. The law of consciousness does not ask whether the state is desirable or undesirable, noble or base, hopeful or despairing. It simply reflects it without judgment. When you live in lack, the world shows you lack. When you dwell in wealth, the world arranges itself to confirm wealth. When you assume health, opportunities and conditions arise to support vitality. This is why states are everything. You do not attract what you want by pleading, nor do you receive what you desire by effort alone. You embody a state, and the world mirrors it. The outer is compelled, without exception, to conform to the inner atmosphere you maintain. People will treat you in ways consistent with your assumption. Opportunities will arise in line with the state you dwell in. Even so-called accidents and chance events will bend themselves to align with the state that governs you. The world is not separate from you. It is you pushed out, reflecting with meticulous faithfulness the state of being you occupy. To change your life, you must change your state. To linger in the old state is to invite repetition of the same experiences. Many imagine they are imprisoned by facts, when in truth they are imprisoned only by their refusal to leave the state that produces those facts. You do not beg conditions to alter, you shift inwardly to another state, and the conditions must follow. The beggar who occupies the state of abundance will soon find channels opening, resources appearing, and the world presenting opportunities he once thought impossible. The sick person who occupies the state of health will notice improvements, encounters, and alignments that move toward restoration. The lonely who dare to occupy the state of love will find affection flowing toward them from every side. The difficulty lies not in the law, but in man's faithlessness to it. He tests it for a day and abandons it when the shadow does not immediately change. Yet shadows are slow to shift. They lag behind the movement of the light. Persist in the state long enough, and the outer must bend, for it has no choice. The law cannot fail. It does not ask if you are worthy or deserving, it simply outpictures the state. That is why vigilance is required. You cannot afford to dwell in fear, resentment, or lack, for to dwell there is to demand the world reflect it back to you. Likewise, you cannot visit the state of your wish fulfilled briefly and expect results. You must live there, think from it, feel from it, and return to it again and again until it becomes your natural dwelling place. Your world is not an objective place separate from your consciousness. It is a mirror, faithfully reflecting back to you the unseen arrangement of your thoughts and assumptions. The people you meet are actors cast in the play you have authored by the state you occupy. The situations you encounter are scenes arranged by the vibration you emit through your inner acceptance. Nothing stands apart from you. Everything bends to the condition of your inner world. When you understand this, you cease to fight with appearances. You no longer resist conditions, complain about others, or plead with circumstances. Instead, you ask, what state am I occupying that this is being shown to me? And then you deliberately shift to another. The power lies not in trying to manipulate the outer, but in assuming the state inwardly until it feels natural. When it feels natural, it is yours. And when it is yours within, the world must reflect it without. It has no choice, for the world is not cause but effect. The only cause is the state you occupy, and the only freedom you need is the freedom to assume another state. Persist in this truth, remain loyal to the unseen reality of your desire fulfilled, and the world, with all its seeming immovability, must conform. Practice assumption before sleep, enter the wish fulfilled. For the moments before you drift into unconsciousness are the most powerful gateways into creation. The subconscious mind does not argue, question, or resist in those final drowsy moments of awareness. It simply accepts whatever is impressed upon it as fact. What you feel to be true as you surrender to sleep becomes the seed planted in the fertile soil of the subconscious, and like any seed, it must bear fruit in the outer world. Most people squander this sacred time by rehearsing the disappointments of the day, replaying fears, or worrying about tomorrow, and by doing so, they unknowingly instruct their subconscious to reproduce those very conditions. Yet you may, with full awareness, use this nightly descent into slumber as the bridge into your desired reality by assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. To practice assumption before sleep is to deliberately shut the door to appearances and enter inwardly into the end you desire. You imagine not that it will happen, not that it might happen, but that it has already happened. You feel yourself to be in possession of your desire. You dwell in the satisfaction of its completion. And you let this feeling carry you into the depths of unconsciousness. In this state, you are no longer arguing with reason or struggling with the senses. You are impressing upon the mind that governs all expression the reality you have chosen to occupy. The outer world may resist for a time, but once the subconscious accepts the impression, it must externalize it. This practice requires consistency, for repetition deepens impression. Each night, as you prepare for sleep, turn your attention away from the day's facts and toward the inner reality of your wish fulfilled. See yourself as the one you desire to be, not as someone hoping to become it, but as someone already living it. If your desire is wealth, feel the ease and freedom of financial abundance. If your desire is health, feel the vitality of a body restored. If your desire is love, feel the warmth of companionship and affection. Whatever your desire, it is the feeling of its reality that must accompany you into slumber. The subconscious is moved not by idle words, but by deeply felt emotion. And what is felt with conviction in sleep is carried into waking life as circumstance. Many dismiss this practice as fanciful, yet the law is unwavering. Every night, you impress the subconscious with something, whether intentionally or not. The mind does not rest, it continues to create according to the last impression received. If you enter sleep burdened with fear, anxiety, and doubt, you sow seeds of repetition, ensuring more of the same in your waking hours. But if you enter sleep clothed in the assumption of your desire fulfilled, you sow seeds of transformation, ensuring that the world must eventually mirror the new state. The discipline is simple, though not always easy. Refuse to fall asleep in the old state, no matter how convincing it appears, and instead carry into unconsciousness the feeling of your fulfilled wish. There is no effort in this beyond the willingness to persist. You need not strain, force, or control. The very drowsiness of sleep assists you, for in that relaxed state the conscious mind loosens its grip and the subconscious stands receptive. What you whisper to yourself in imagination, what you feel to be real in those quiet moments, sinks down effortlessly. Night after night, you build the foundation of a new reality, and though results may not be immediate, persistence guarantees manifestation. Just as a seed planted in the soil does not sprout overnight, but requires time to gestate, so too do your assumptions take root and unfold in perfect order. The beauty of this practice lies in its simplicity. There is no ritual, no elaborate effort, only the act of feeling the wish fulfilled, as though it were already yours. Let the scene play gently in your imagination, not with strain but with ease, until it feels natural, until you can fall asleep in the conviction of its truth. If distractions come, return again to the feeling. If doubts arise, remind yourself that the outer world is but the echo of yesterday's state and has no authority over tomorrow's creation. Your task is only to persist, to remain loyal to the unseen until it becomes seen. By practicing assumption before sleep, you align yourself with the very principle of creation. You cease to be a victim of circumstance and become a deliberate shaper of your reality. Every night you are given the opportunity to sow new seeds, to reset the direction of your life, to impress upon the subconscious the vision of the world you choose to inhabit. Use this sacred time wisely, for it is the portal through which the unseen becomes seen, the dream becomes fact, and the desire becomes experience. Reality bends to unwavering assumption, for assumption is the hidden law by which all things are made visible. The world you see before you, with its circumstances, conditions, and appearances, is not an independent force acting upon you, but the mirror of what you have dared to assume within. Life has no choice but to conform to the state you consistently occupy, for consciousness is the only reality and assumption is its creative act. What you claim inwardly, when held with persistence and conviction, compels reality itself to arrange its forms in obedience. The outer world is clay, malleable and pliant, and your assumption is the mold that shapes it into fact. At first, this truth may seem unbelievable, for the senses scream the opposite. You look at lack and are told you are poor. You look at sickness and are told you are unwell. You look at loneliness and are told you are unloved. But these are only the lingering shadows of past states, the delayed reflections of assumptions once held. They appear solid, but they are echoes, and like echoes they fade when no longer sustained. The law does not operate on appearances but on assumption. Assume wealth, and though the evidence contradicts you, reality will, in time, bend to reflect abundance. Assume health, and though the body seems frail, reality will, in time, bend to reflect vitality. Assume love, and though loneliness surrounds you, reality will, in time, bend to reflect companionship. This bending of reality is not chance, nor is it coincidence. It is the inevitable outworking of the law of consciousness. What you assume, when persisted in, hardens into fact. The outer must rearrange itself to echo the inner, for the inner alone is cause. The beggar who assumes abundance becomes the prosperous man. The lonely who assume love become the beloved. The sick who assume health become the healed. The law is impartial, responding not to wish or plea, but to assumption. What you inwardly accept as true, you outwardly experience. The key is unwavering assumption. To assume lightly, to hold a vision for a moment and then abandon it in doubt, is to plant a seed and then uproot it before it can take root. Reality bends only to that which is held with loyalty, to that which is persisted in until it feels natural. When an assumption is repeated, when it becomes the natural climate of your mind, it sinks into the subconscious, and once impressed upon the subconscious, it must manifest. It does not ask how, it does not ask when, it simply unfolds in perfect order. Your task is not to concern yourself with the means, but to remain steadfast in the assumption of the end. Unwavering assumption requires discipline, for the senses will tempt you to waver. The world will present evidence contrary to your desire, urging you to surrender your vision. People may discourage you, conditions may mock you, time may delay you, yet the one who persists without wavering holds the power that bends reality itself. The law does not bend to the timid or the doubtful. It bends to the one who remains loyal to the unseen even while the seen denies it. Faith is nothing more than unwavering assumption. The conviction that what is unseen is more real than what is seen, that the imagined is more true than the apparent. This is not to deny appearances, but to ignore their authority. Appearances are but the aftereffects of old assumptions, powerless in themselves. When you refuse to bow to them, when you withdraw attention from them and remain loyal to your inner vision, you rob them of life. The old state fades as the new state takes root. Reality cannot resist, for reality has no will of its own. It is but the servant of your assumption. Everything you see is evidence of a state once entertained, and everything you will see is evidence of the state you now choose to occupy. To practice unwavering assumption, you must live in the end. You must imagine yourself already in possession of your desire, already being the one you wish to be. Feel it real, not as something to come, but as something present. When you fall asleep, do so in the feeling of the wish fulfilled. When you wake, carry yourself as though it were already accomplished. Let your inner conversations, your moods, your attitudes all reflect the state of the end realized. If doubts arise, return again to the vision. If appearances contradict, remind yourself they are echoes. Persist until the assumption feels so natural that it no longer feels like imagination, but life itself. Examples of this law abound in every life. The man who assumed success while others laughed eventually saw the world bend to recognize his achievement. The woman who assumed love while surrounded by rejection eventually found herself cherished and adored. The one who assumed healing while the body suffered eventually rose in strength and wholeness. These are not miracles in the sense of violations of law, but demonstrations of it. Reality must bend, for reality is the obedient servant of unwavering assumption. The challenge is not in the law, but in man's wavering faith. He assumes for a moment and then doubts. He imagines briefly and then abandons the vision. He looks to the outer world for confirmation and, finding none, returns to the old state. Yet the outer world is always delayed, always behind the inner. To demand instant evidence is to misunderstand the law. The seed requires time to gestate. The shadow lags behind the light. Persist, and the evidence will come, for it cannot fail. Unwavering assumption is the secret of all transformation. The world bends not to effort, not to struggle, not to chance, but to the quiet, steady insistence of assumption. You do not need to fight conditions. You do not need to manipulate others. You do not need to beg for change. You need only assume, and assume unwaveringly, that the end is already here. The law takes care of the rest. Reality bends to unwavering assumption because reality is nothing more than your assumption objectified. What you hold within, you must hold without, for consciousness is the only reality and assumption is its creative act.